All right, kids, we're cracking Canuckleheads. For the next little while, we're going to be talking about all the Canadian teams, and we're going to be talking about all the Pacific Division teams. And it's a pleasure to bring in an old friend and a distinguished broadcaster, TV, radio voice of the Edmonton Oilers, Jackie Michaels, also known as Jack. Jackie, Mike, Goalies.
Good to see you, bud. And a reminder to your viewers that, yes, I'm an old friend of yours, but I'm also one of your younger friends, including
Ooh,
present company inclusive.
really?
Oh, yeah.
I can do the math, but I won't right now. Hey, um, I don't think I want to.
No.
We're good looking enough, pal, but I'm going to put the box around us anyway. Here comes the box. Ooh, that is some nice graphics. All right, let's get right to it. Edmonton Oilers, has the pall lifted, the state of depression? How is the city of Edmonton right now?
Well, I think it was a different feeling this year, quite frankly. I think last year was devastation to work your way back from a 3-0 series deficit and get it into a game seven. And, it was just kind of a low event game seven where Edmonton might not have just had enough juice yet. You left that series thinking the teams were, a coin flip. And in fact, the Oilers, outscored the Panthers in that 7 game series. They got better goaltending, at least by save percentage. In a lot of ways, Edmonton, they won the special teams battle. A lot of ways, the Oilers left that series thinking perhaps they were the better team and came out on the short end after spotting Florida 3-0 series lead. This year, there was none of that. I think the 2 games to start the series in Edmonton were some of the best hockey games I've ever seen,
Yeah.
at least in the NHL. I mean, you could start talking about 87 Canada Cups and things like that. I'm serious. For a Stanley Cup final, I thought the first 2 games were as good a hockey as we've seen in the final since probably that Boston-Chicago series a dozen years ago. I mean, it was really good hockey. Often, as you know, the Stanley Cup final turns into a bit of a walkover where, even if the series goes 7, it's just this war of attrition, and it's basically who has enough healthy bodies standing. There was some really good hockey in the first 2 games of the series, both of which going to overtime. But after that, Florida stayed at that level and Edmonton's level dropped. And part of the reason Edmonton's level dropped is Florida's a worthy champion. Florida's a damn good hockey team.
Yeah, they really, they really are.
I don't know whether they beat Tampa, whether, peak Florida beats peak Tampa. But I have an inclination that Florida's as good a champion as we've seen in the league since Chicago and the 3 cups they won between 2010 and 2015. They're a really good hockey club. And if you don't have your absolute best, you have no chance to beat them in a 7 game series. And I think, quite frankly, Florida let Edmonton off the hook in game 4. They won it in 6. And yet, even though it was a 6 game series, it felt like there was an air of resignation
Yeah.
around the city as opposed to devastation.
Yeah, I could see that. It kind of reminded me, and you might have been in diapers, Jack, but it kind of reminded me of the 87 final when Edmonton actually beat the Flyers and Ron Hextall stood on his head and did the best he could. And that series was just out of control fun. Um,
Yeah, well, the Flyers in that series, Rob, the 3 games they won, they were down 2 goals in all 3 of those
yeah,
games and
it was
still
it was
won.
it was so
And,
much fun.
I do remember that series. It was one of the first series I can remember. And there was this inevitability that Edmonton is going to win. And all of a sudden, you're in a game 7, and it's
Yeah,
2-1 with a couple minutes to go. And then Glenn Anderson scores from 60 feet out to finally put Philadelphia away.
which was ironic. Yeah, Florida, the physicality and the nasty factor. I mean, talk about teams around the NHL looking for a physical identity, and so many of them lack that element, and Florida epitomizes it right now. And that's, let's face it, playoff hockey. That's what you got to have. Uh, Mr. McDavid, gee, I'm not sure anybody is aware of the fact that he is now eligible to sign a new contract. His agent Judd and the management of the Oilers. Where are we? What are we doing? And what do we think is going to happen? And just how many fingernails are being chewed upon over the next 11 months?
Well, I don't think it's going to get to an 11-month scenario. I do think this contract is going to be worked out on McDavid's terms. And I do think, my strong hunch is that it's going to run on terms, similar of Wasserman clients. And for that matter, the contract that Evan Bouchard just signed, which was 4 years at $42 million. I don't think we'll see, if I had to guess, I don't think we'll see a Draisaitl 8-year type of deal because, as was maybe most famously put in Draft Day, which is a movie that only I know because it celebrated my beloved Cleveland Browns. But this is a different world than it was, last year. Or, it's just the salary cap, the way it's going up. I think players of Bouchard and McDavid's caliber are being told by their agents, and rightfully so, hey, there's a potential to get a 2-for-1 deal here. Get market value now and get market value again in 3 or 4 years when, in Bouchard's case, you're still 29, 30 years old. And in McDavid's case, you're still 32 and still in the prime of your career, if not the back end of your prime. So I would expect, a 4-year deal with a number somewhere around 16, 17 million per. And, again, that's me speculating what I think it could be.
Yeah.
But make no mistake, this is a contract, and it's one of the maybe 4 or 5 out there in the National Hockey League that will be completely negotiated on McDavid's terms. And you know what? Edmonton acknowledged,
Why not?
Evan Bouchard, once he said what the numbers would be, or look like on a 7 or 8 year deal, that was the end. They really never talked long term because the Oilers recognized that Bouchard's focus was to sign in a more 3 to 4 year range. Again, I'm speculating. I haven't talked to McDavid. I haven't talked to Judd Moldaver. I don't make a habit of reaching out to agencies. But my hunch would be it's far more likely that his extension is going to be in the 3 to 5 year range than the 8-year max.
Have you done the math, by the way? Because I haven't. You said 16 or 17. There, you can only plateau at a certain percentage of your overall salary, right? What is that number? I don't remember what the number is.
Yeah,
Like 20
it's
or
again
25?
based on, and that deal would then be structured according to what the cap's going to go up 3 or 4 years. Again, this is straying a little bit from my expertise in terms of what exactly that number is going to look like, but that is those are some numbers that are being speculated upon as the most likely of McDavid's extensions. But again, you and I hear whispers, does McDavid want to play in Toronto? That is not on the table at this stage. McDavid will sign an extension. It's just not going to be the length that Leon Draisaitl signed, and that's no reflection on the city of Edmonton or the state of the Oilers organization. It is just a far different salary cap world in 2025 than it was in 2024.
Right. Are we happy with Edmonton Oilers net minding moving forward?
Well, I think, based on what was available in the free agent market, I thought Stan Bowman did a nice job of not make, sometimes the best moves you can make are the ones you don't.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, this summer reminded me of the summer of 2022 in terms of the goaltending free agent market, when the two biggest names out there were Jack Campbell and Billy Husso, and both signed major ticket deals. And, I was first guessing a little bit because, quite frankly, Jack Campbell and Billy Husso had not done a whole lot, but they were the beneficiaries of a fairly shallow goaltending free agent market. Very similar to what we saw 3 years later here in the present day, summer 2025. And if you think about it, Campbell and Husso were both in the minors within a year and a half. Again, I'm not trying to pick on those guys, but the market this summer reminded me of 2022, and I thought Stan Bowman showed restraint and not just signing some guy to a ticket that he might dearly look to regret. that doesn't mean the goaltending issue is solved per se.
Yeah.
If there is a goaltending issue, and keep in mind, we are talking about a tandem that has led Edmonton, whatever you want to say, but you could say, oh, McDavid and Draisaitl led them, but the bottom line is they've been the goaltender, and Edmonton has been one of the final two teams standing 2 years running.
Right.
And 2 years running in the Western Conference Final, the guy that will be neck and neck with Connor Hellebuck to start for Team USA at the Olympics, Jake Ottinger, has been thoroughly outplayed by Stuart Skinner. It has not been close either year. Skinner has completely outplayed him, and the Oilers have taken care of business. 6 games last year and 5 games this year. In the Vegas series, Calvin Pickard and Skinner both outplayed a Stanley Cup champion in Adin Hill. In the LA series, Calvin Pickard came on in relief and in games 3 through 6 completely outplayed another Stanley Cup champion and the Vezina runner-up, I believe, Darcy Kemper this year. So while there's reasons why people are saying, hey, what about the goaltending? And the biggest reason is who's the starter in game 5 and 6 of the Stanley Cup final. If you're answering that question, if you have to answer that question, then yes, I understand why goaltending is talked about. But on the other side, in a shallow free agent market with goaltenders who have thoroughly outplayed the best the West has to offer anyways, right, if not the East, I don't blame Stan Bowman for not making a move. Will there be something in play come the deadline this year? Sure, especially if it's not working out and Edmonton is not getting, above average goaltending. And last year, the Oilers' save percentage in the regular season wasn't great. Skinner was under 900 both in the regular season and the postseason. If that happens again, I'm sure Stan Bowman will be kicking tires. But, for me to go out and get a guy, a journeyman like Jake Allen or a guy like John Gibson who has, come out of 20 Anaheim games in the last 4 years. I mean, I liked his numbers this year, but he ultimately is not reliable. To make a trade for that guy and take on the commensurate $6 million cap hit doesn't make a whole lot of sense when your fallback position is a tandem that's gotten you to the Stanley Cup final 2 years in a row.
Yeah. I always feel bad for Gibby, though, because he's taken a beating in Anaheim for the last
he has.
Yeah,
right.
He has,
Rob. But I don't like the coming out of games in the second. How many times have you and I looked at the box score the night after Anaheim games and seen John Gibson played 36 minutes before leaving with an undisclosed injury? I mean, when that happens an average of 5-6 times a year, it's an issue.
Yeah. All right. Well, he had ice in his veins when he won World Juniors, and he looked pretty damn good for the few seasons after that. And then I just,
tough Rob, if this was 4 or 5 years ago, you go out and get John Gibson all day.
Yeah.
But I wonder whether, like you said, how much tread is left on that tire, because he has been in the net for a lot of beatings over the last few years from a club that, quite frankly, has lacked structure, under its last couple of head coaches.
I'd love to go back and see the shot totals, like just see how many shots.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Like, absurd.
I can tell you right off the top of my head that Lucas Dostal has beaten the Oilers a couple of times, saving 45 shots.
Right. Very little cap space, and the draft, your first pick was 83rd overall. A kid from up in BC here in Vancouver, Horn. He's listed his hometown. His hometown is listed 3 different places, but he played in Abbotsford, elite teenage hockey at the Yale Academy, and Tommy Lafreniere, who apparently is not related to Alex.
Right.
Which makes sense. They're on opposite ends of the planet, so to speak.
So where do you go to get players is your question. Where do you go to add?
Exactly. Do you need to add? What do you want to do? Do you wait and see your goaltending and tweak it as you move along? Try to move a guy in, move a guy out? Is that kind of
what the Oilers did is they moved a couple of guys out. They basically,
Arvidsson?
Yeah, got rid of Arvidsson and replaced – they took Arvidsson and Skinner and said, all right, we signed 2 veteran guys. It didn't work. Let's cut our losses. We're not going to re-sign Jeff Skinner. who didn't get the same kind of opportunity that Victor Arvidsson did, and we're going to find a taker for Arvidsson. And quite frankly, I thought it was a minor miracle they got even a draft pick without having to move, something else out or whatever. I thought maybe the Oilers might have to fork over a draft pick to get rid of that $4 million cap hit.
Right.
But they got a draft pick back from the Bruins, and they moved on from a situation that just wasn't working. So they replaced those two with another veteran winger who's had some big years in the league, who has a little more bite than either Arvidsson or Jeff Skinner, and that's Andrew Mangiapane,
Right.
who could play either wing, although he's better on the left side. So look for him to maybe get a sniff alongside Connor McDavid. I'd tell you he might play with Leon Draisaitl, but on the other hand, a guy that Edmonton got from Vancouver, Vasily Podkolzin, is one of Draisaitl's favorite players to play with. So even though he doesn't score a lot of goals, he's an excellent puck retriever. So Mangiapane's going to be in the top six mix. The other thing the Oilers did is they moved on from a first-round pick that, had potential, but, his ceiling kind of seemed to suggest third-line center as opposed to, top six scorer. And so they traded Sam O'Reilly, their first-round pick a couple years back, for Isaac Howard, who was a late first-round pick of the Tampa Bay Lightning. We all know one thing Julian Brisebois can do is find hockey players and draft hockey players. Tampa's got an excellent draft record. Howard won the Hobey Baker. He led the NCAAs in goal scoring. And while not every Hobey Baker winner is going to be Jack Eichel or the late Johnny Gaudreau, there's a record of scoring there. And he's a scoring winger that the Oilers are going to count upon to compete for a job in the top six. They've also got Matt Savoy, who was a top 10 pick of the Buffalo Sabres, who've seen a lot of top 10 picks move on from them and go on to win Stanley Cups and have fabulous careers once they got away from Buffalo. And that's, again, Matt Savoy. He had a nice year in the American League last year. Again, we're talking about Savoy and Howard, guys that played in the American League and the NCAAs, challenging for top six, top nine roles. As you know, Rob, that's not a lock. It's not a lock.
No.
You hope you hit on one of those. If you hit on two, you're loving life combined with Mangiapane. But you're hoping one of those two do something. The other thing they did is they went out and got a guy from the Czech League, the Swedish League. He's led the Swedish League in scoring the last 2 years. He's Czech. His name is David Tomasek. He's 29 years old. He's a guy they are hoping they can plug and play in a top nine role. They're hoping that this is a guy at his physical and professional peak that can come over and, and be a guy whose game translates well. Again, no guarantees. I mean, for every Mark Giordano that, goes overseas and comes back and is a hell of a National Hockey League player, the Oilers have tried this before with Gaetan Haas, with Joachim Nygaard a few years ago. I mean, they've tapped into that European market before. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Again, for every Artemi Panarin, there's a Dominic Cahoon. We don't know what's going to happen there, right? So those are three guys, like you said, when you don't have lock stock, in the NHL within a year or two picks, and the Oilers certainly have not had those the last couple of years.
Nope.
This is where you go to find players. And, to swing the deal for Isaac Howard, a lot of people are excited about.
Moving money. Evander Kane.
Yeah, Evander Kane, that's another deal. I mean, quite frankly, I think the Oilers did well to get a draft pick for Evander Kane. And, he's going to go to Vancouver. I don't know quite what the Canucks are doing. They seem to be in this middle ground of maybe a team that, could finish 7th to 11th, which is always that murky middle in any sport. Doesn't work that well because you're not getting the highest of picks, and there's certainly no guarantee that you'll make the playoffs. I think the Canucks are hoping with a healthy Thatcher Demko, a cleansing of the locker room, And the addition, I mean, that's the other thing is, I say cleansing of the locker room, and Evander Kane's a big personality. There's no guarantee that that's going to be a fit. I think Evander's a highly motivated athlete, though, and he is a phenomenal guy in the sense that he didn't play the whole year and was a guy who contributed in the playoffs. I mean, I have all the respect in the world for Evander Kane, and I would have loved to have seen how his Edmonton career had panned out had he not been run over by Pat Maroon's skate. I mean, that really sent his career, to the side. I mean, he had been an unbelievable fit in Edmonton prior to that horrific injury. And I'm not sure he's all the way back from that, quite frankly. I mean, that did some nerve damage in your wrists. And, for as physical a guy as Evander Kane is, he's still a scorer, Rob. So when you have an injury to your wrist, and you're a scorer, you're a guy who scored 30 goals in this league. You're a guy who, was tied for the goal scoring lead in the 2022 playoffs. That's a major injury. So
I like the pick. I
do think.
I like.
Yeah, I mean,
it's
a wild card pickup for Vancouver, but Edmonton had to move the money, and then Connor Brown, of course, leaves.
Yeah.
And there was no way the Oilers were going to have Brown back at $3 million per. They just don't have the cap room for that. So you're absolutely right. Some guys have moved out, and when you don't have the early round picks the last couple of years, you got to go out and find players. So you bring in Howard via trade. You've got Matt Savoy, who's probably your top prospect up front, in the pipeline, and then you take a chance on a European guy like David Tomasek. All these guys can score theoretically. Can they score in the NHL? There's no guarantee.
Jackie, baby, good stuff. Very thorough. We've got the lineup. Well, we have the lineup because until they start going one for one, moving things around, you have your lineup for the most part.
I mean, yeah, and that's the other thing. The Oilers probably will come in around $2 million under the cap. The accrual will take place, and at the deadline, the Oilers will be in the market for
something.
Either two $4 million players or potentially a Mikko Rantanen type of acquisition. The other thing that happened in the West, and you're talking Pacific Division specifically, but as a whole, not just Vegas, but I would say, the middle has improved, but the top teams, what did Dallas and Colorado do? What did Vegas do? Yes, they brought in Mitch Marner, but they said goodbye to Nick Waugh, and they're not going to have Alex Pietrangelo. So where does that leave Vegas? I mean, I'm just saying it's really interesting. I think the West is going to be a little more tightly compacted this year, Rob, because the elite teams probably are not going to do much to get that much better until the deadline.
It might be a case of the more things change, the more they stay the same.
There you go.
Although I think the Vancouver Canucks will be improved. I like the Kane pickup. Physicality, they need to add an identity. You can't have Connor Garland at 5'9", 165 pounds being your nastiest player. You need to and plus hometown for Kane. Maybe he's matured. Maybe he's got a lot to prove, and he's going to be back home. He's gotten in trouble in Vancouver before, but I think
a motivated Evander Kane, though,
okay.
I'm telling you what, when Evander's motivated, and I'm not suggesting he's not, but I've seen this guy go on runs before where he truly is. When he's at peak efficiency, Evander Kane is one of the top 5 power forwards in the league, even at his age. So that's the wild card that Vancouver's going after. And I'll be real interested to see, what that means, because he's going to have an opportunity to be a bit of a leader in that room. And because that room, was fractured last year. And the reason I say, let's see what Vancouver does, they've got a lot of work to do, and not all of it is on the ice. They've got to repair some real damage that was done off the ice. And I think, quite frankly, when your $11.5 million player has not proven that, he can come out of that shell that he was kind of put into from the moment he signed that contract, that's a big question mark. When your top player and your top goaltender have question marks around, it's tough for me to label them a playoff slam dunk.
No, they're not a slam dunk, but I like the D core. They're just weak up the middle, and that's obviously where you have to be strong. Bless you. Yeah, the middle is an issue.
Yeah,
You mentioned U.S. Olympic goaltending, by the way. I mean, Demko, what, 2 seasons ago was an automatic lock. Like he was an absolute. I mean, it was going to be Hellebuck, Demko. It was going to be Ottinger. Those three
sure.
would be the
Yeah,
three. Now Demko, God, who knows? And then can Lankinen repeat what he's done in this situation?
right.
So,
I mean, that's a huge question that Vancouver's going to have to answer because again, when you're goaltending and your top player,
there's
there's question
question
marks
marks.
around both. That's an issue. I
Yeah, yeah.
mean, and again, I mean, if I'm not even saying Pedersen needs to be a 100-point player, maybe that was it for him. Maybe that was his Ryan Nugent Hopkins season. But man, he's got to be an 80
Good.
point player if he's occupying that much room on your salary cap. Because if he's not, I don't think you have much of a shot.
Right. And they got to keep Hughes healthy. That's why they needed to toughen up. You can't expose that player to
Well,
he
they've
gets
not only got to
abused.
keep Hughes healthy, but they've also got to keep him happy.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they do.
Because
Well,
I'll tell you what, Quinn
he's,
Hughes does
he's a
not
year away.
plan on being part of a rebuilding project in Vancouver for the next 5 years of his career, his prime years. He does not want to spend that in that, again, murky middle of winning 35 hockey games a year.
Guess who's happy about the potential there? Our pal Tommy Fitzgerald, because those brothers are tight. And if it's not going the way he wants, it's going to be Quinn with Jack and Luke,
Yeah.
which not definitely within the realm of possibility. We'll see. It's going to be fun. Jackie, a pleasure. You played some golf today. How'd you hit them?
All over the place, as usual.
That's good. As long as you had a couple frothy beverages to make up the difference, that's fine.
I always see the furthest reaches of the golf course. There's no inch of an Edmonton area golf course that I have not visited.
Yeah. I used to be like that. I used to be a botanist when I played.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, good stuff, my friend. We'll talk to you soon. Enjoy the summer that's coming up, and we'll come back around and we'll see where we stand maybe in September as we get close to the season.
I'll look forward to it, Simmer. Take care.
Thanks, Jackie, baby. Jack Michaels, voice of the Edmonton Oilers.